in the preliminary eliminations of the tournament. Lampejo secured her spot with 40 consecutive victories, already setting her sights on winning the Block League matches. Meanwhile, Rick was eager to give his best. Angelica raised an eyebrow, questioning whether Rick truly intended to fight 40 times in 4 days, especially since each venue hosted only one player. This meant he would need to travel hundreds of miles to dozens of locations where the fights took place. But before Lampejo could finish her thought, Rionette lost patience and called Rick to start the marathon, reminding him of their fight at Green Hill Arena scheduled for 10 am. Angelica panicked, shouting that the arena was 30 miles away, and that even a fast carriage wouldn't get them there in time. Offended, Gladiator responded that he was in too much of a hurry to catch a carriage, so he planned to run there instead. In no time, he sped off at the speed of sound, leaving Lampejo astonished as she struggled to accept how he defied all the laws of physics. Annette then asked if Angelica was interested in watching Rick's fight. Angelica wanted to, but had no idea how she'd get there in time. The elf offered to take her in an unexpected way by leaping between the city's rooftops at an incredible speed while carrying her in her arms. Upon reaching Green Hill Arena, Rick was surprised to find Lampejo collapsed in the backstage area. Despite being there, she hadn't managed to see the fight due to sheer panic. In any case, Rick felt somewhat relieved not to have an audience, especially since he made a serious mistake with the third of his 8 secrets, realizing that it needed some adjustments. Behind him, Rionette reminded Rick it was time for the next fight, and he quickly headed off to his new challenge. Angelica begged to stay at Green Hill, but the elf ignored her pleas and carried her to Kolak Arena. There, Rick, the human member of the Orichokum Fist, tried to calibrate his abilities to avoid turning his opponents into mush, while still securing his victories. At Shutgat Arena, Rick circled his opponent and finished him off with a small tornado created by his movements. By the time he reached Latrina Arena, yet another opponent had fallen before the 30-year-old warrior. After the Colosseum's mad dash, Angelica could hardly believe that Rick had actually managed 40 victories in 4 days to pass the preliminaries. Sitting with Angelica in a beautiful setting reminiscent of Venice, Rionette informed her it was time for the block leagues. Lampejo thanked the heavens she wasn't in the same block as Rick. She planned to win the tournament, but it seemed difficult with Rick participating. Rionette reminded her that Brufston was advancing in the Eastern League, which made Angelica's hopes of winning the championship fade. Rionette mentioned that Rick had set off for the Tronia region, prompting Angelica to curse herself for not being surprised that he was simply walking the 600-mile round trip. She then commented that people might assume she was romantically involved with Rick, but the elf, who harbored great affection for him, didn't mind. Embarrassed, Angelica pretended it wasn't a big deal. Suddenly, the establishment's manager appeared, desperate and begging the two ladies for help. Meanwhile, Bugs Bunny from Orichokum Fist arrived at his destination, where he was approached by a strange figure who knew his name, Snape Resurrect, the president of the Western League Management Committee. Snape greeted Rick, intrigued by his historic run through the eliminations, and mentioned that Angelica wasn't present. He explained to Rick that despite being a merchant, he had a good relationship with the House of Daimuit. Rick noticed Snape's firm handshake and deduced that he had been a boxer. Snape confirmed this, sharing that he had competed 20 years ago, winning a small competition before retiring at 23, making that victory both his first and last. Rick was curious about the reason for his retirement, but Snape had to leave. Before departing, Snape mentioned that his company had entered a competitor in the tournament and asked Rick to remind Angelica not to overdo it in the competition. After Gladiator entered the militias, she expressed concern about Rick speaking with the owner of the Dragonaut Company, Snape Resurrect. While Snape might appear to be a gentleman, there were rumors that he had deep ties to the criminal underworld, and he was also the main sponsor of this year's competition. Rick mentioned that the businessman had entered a competitor in the tournament. The Beast Girl then explained that this competitor was there to fill the sponsor's slot. a position reserved for the company that financed most of the event. Nearby, two men were chatting about the high level of this year's bunny girls, particularly the newcomer, a dark elf girl. Speaking of which, Angelica and Rionette were giving their all to play the role of the event's bunny girls. Enthusiastic, Daimie lifted everyone's spirits by taking bets on who the 7 competitors would be in the King of Fists tournament. A colleague remarked that Angelica was born for this job, which frustrated her since she was doing it against her will. Rionette chimed in, saying she wished Angelica had turned down the invitation. However, Angelica couldn't bring herself to say no to a man with a bleeding forehead. Suddenly, a drunk man grabbed a bunny girl's arm and chased her away before pestering Angelica. To make matters worse, he insulted her, saying she didn't even have a decent figure. A flash of lightning struck, leaving the man on the ground. At that moment, Rick arrived and asked what Angelica was doing in that outfit. But then Rionette appeared, also dressed as a bunny girl, catching Rick's attention. Indignant, Angelica questioned why his reaction was so different while she was dealing with the drunk. As night fell, Kerwin Orwolf discussed with his master Brufston's crushing victory in the Eastern League preliminaries, where the Orc won all 40 fights in just 2 days, each by knockout. Despite this, Kerwin also recalled that Gladiator had a similar performance, so he was certain this year's championship would be great fun. Years ago, Orwolf's master had followed a man through dirty, ruined streets until they reached a gate. Inside, they saw the beastman who would become the celebrated champion of the King of Fists. The master asked if they were in the presence of the voracious wolf, which Kerwin confirmed. The master, instead of settling a score, intended to recruit the fighter to Heractopia, offering wealth and glory. Kerwin made an expression his master hadn't seen in a long time, one that reappeared when the beastman discovered he had 2 worthy rivals in the competition. The next day, Rick and Rionette tried to console Angelica after her stint as a bunny girl, but nothing seemed to change Daimie's furious demeanor. Gladiator mentioned speaking with Snape Resurrect, but Angelica pretended not to know who that was. Later, the group headed to the venue for the next phase, where only one participant from each block would qualify for the final tournament. In the first fight of the block, Helen Thompson faced Angelica Daimuit. Angelica started with her signature instant step, but her strong opponent blocked the attack. Despite her tension, Angelica managed to defeat Thompson and advance to the next stage. When it was Rick's turn, he used the 3rd step of the 8 secrets to take it easy. As the hours passed, Gladiator and Angelica kept advancing, maintaining the same intensity until they reached the final rounds. With only 4 fights remaining, neither could afford to lose. Daimie didn't slow down, combining her water wall with the thunderbolt arrow to win her matches. However, her next opponent, Taylor Brid, escaped her tactic unscathed. Surprisingly, the big guy matched her speed and hit her with a powerful punch, ending the fight. After the defeat, Angelica was treated by a nurse. Outside the room, Rick mentioned that her opponent's defensive strength was immense, but she had insisted on a strategy that visibly wore her down. Losing her patience, Angelica stormed off until Rick convinced her to talk calmly. She then confessed that Snape Resurrect was her fiancé, explaining that after her parents died in an accident a year ago, her inexperience led to financial trouble for her family. Her stingy grandfather made a deal with Snape, who offered a truckload of money in exchange for marrying her. Rick finally realized the girl was engaged to the lizard man and was shocked. Angelica added that she had investigated Snape, trying to annul the engagement, and discovered he would become the main sponsor of the event. She was about to finish her thought when a commotion from a nearby bar caught their attention. Inside, Taylor Brid tried to help a girl being attacked by a lizard man, but was taken down with just 1 blow. The lizard man then turned his fury on the girl, demanding compensation for spilling his beer. Angelica screamed at the lizard man, despite fearing his strength. Just as the creature was about to punch her, Rick shielded his companion. At that moment, Snape appeared and asked Jeeth, his competitor, to hold back until the tournament, which the pugilist did by fleeing the bar. Rick asked who that was, and Snape revealed it was Jeeth Resurrect, his younger brother, a brute who was cocky because no one could stand up to him. Before leaving, Snape expressed his happiness that Angelica was safe, stating that her well-being was his most precious treasure. After the businessman left, Rick questioned the connection between the engagement and Snape being the tournament's main sponsor. Angelica explained that the money exchanged for the engagement was so substantial that after investigating the Argonaut Company, she discovered they had almost nothing. This tournament was Snape's chance to reclaim his fortune, and the event was rigged in his favor to ruin her fiancé's company. Angelica needed to defeat Jeeth, but it seemed impossible. Faced with the challenge, Rick offered to train Angelica. This bring an end to our episode 7.